Mr. Speaker, we're back at it. I'm wearing a green tie today, not because I used to work for the former Finance Minister, Jim Flaherty, but because it's the color of money, and it's the color of the Green Slush Fund. Somehow, we're still in this twilight zone. It feels a little bit like the movie Groundhog Day. I note from the letter that the law clerk has written with respect to Parliament's ability to receive the documents in question. I quote, "I note the order is an exercise of the House of Commons' power to send for documents. This parliamentary privilege is rooted in the preamble of the Constitution and Section 4 of the Parliament of Canada Act." I'll note that nowhere in the motion does the House pretend to direct the RCMP. All it merely says is that these documents need to be made available to them. If the RCMP decides not to look at them, that's fine. If the RCMP, on recommendations from the Justice Department, says that some of these documents would be inadmissible, that would be up for the RCMP to decide. But let's just remember, this isn't the first time the RCMP haven't been able to get documents. Need I remind my honourable colleagues of SNC Lavalin, the WE scandal, foreign interference, which, by the way, foreign interference, for the entire time this entire debate has occurred in the House, the government, the individuals within the government who have all of the information all the way along have said, there is nothing to see here, please move along. Well, geez, the biggest understatement that we have seen coming out of this government with respect to foreign interference. Lo and behold, explosive testimony at the public inquiry that this government didn't want to have. Need I remind this House about the Winnipeg lab documents? Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter. There are criminal code provisions related to breach of trust that ought to be explored by the RCMP. It's up to them to do so, but we want to make sure that they have the information under which to conduct an investigation if they choose to do so. But it raises a bigger question about the role of this House and the fact that the government, and members of the government in particular, seem to consider this chamber and Parliament and its committees a mere inconvenience. Go back to 2020 in the early days of the pandemic. What did this government try to do? Tried to introduce legislation to give itself unlimited taxing and spending powers without having Parliament sit for oversight. We have ministers who routinely ignore invitations to come to committee. They frustrated the WE scandal. In fact, they prorogued Parliament to avoid that scandal. They took your office to court, Mr. Speaker. All in the name of protecting charter rights. This is why they're apparently not giving the documents here. Well, what about the charter rights of the people who had their bank accounts frozen for what appears to be charges of public mischief? But here the government wants to protect the privacy rights of people who may have defrauded the Canadian taxpayer and the Canadian public of significant money. Now, let's go back to why. The Governor General has said there's $400 million from this fund that has been either or that has gone to ineligible recipients, including well over 100 specific instances of conflicts of interest. That alone should cause this entire place to stop until we figure out more, until we ensure that Canadian taxpayers will be taken care of. Now, I just saw last week one of the individuals who's at the heart of this scandal appear at Industry Committee. This individual said that she was under scrutiny because that she was a woman and from Quebec. At no point during the testimony did the words, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I should have been more clear or more precise about recusing myself from conflicts of interest." That is the definition of gaslighting, to try to shield yourself from scrutiny when you have been caught dead to rights by the Auditor General for misappropriating funds to companies in which this individual and other individuals on the board have a direct pecuniary financial interest. Now, I'm here, Mr. Speaker, as an individual, and I would like to think we can be collaborative. So I have an idea. I will work hard to convince my colleagues that maybe there's another way. Maybe there's another path to get back to the people's work. Of course, the government could produce the documents. But maybe there's another way. If the government recovers the $400 million, I will work hard to convince my colleagues that maybe we should move past this and get back to the people's work. But I don't think the government has shown any interest in recovering these funds. They were dragged kicking and screaming to do an internal investigation. When they had documents that showed specifically direct conflicts of interest, they waited until the Auditor General's report was done to ask some of these individuals to leave their posts. In fact, when it was known that there was problems with conflicts of interest with this particular fund, one of these individuals, one of these board members, was given a promotion. This person was promoted to the Infrastructure Bank of Canada board. I wonder if that individual had any personal connections to companies involved in the infrastructure space while they were there. It's a very relevant question to ask, but the fact that that person sat on that board for multiple months, even, my understanding is, I think it's even at a year after allegations surface of wrongful conduct, the government left this individual in that position. The government and other members in this House like to bring up scandals of the past. The one they like to bring up is Mike Duffy. And for the life of me, I don't understand why. The only scandal in Canadian history where the taxpayer was repaid. Like, really? $90,000 was repaid to the taxpayer for a wrongful conduct of a senator. And he was in the wrong. But the taxpayer was made whole. So how come this government isn't out trying to recover $400 million from people who shouldn't have gotten it? If these documents are provided to this chamber, to the law clerk, and to members of Parliament, there's nothing to stop any member of Parliament from publishing these documents on their website or making them available to journalists. Of course, the RCMP would be able to look at those anyway. The fact that they're being sent to the RCMP is completely redundant. They will become public documents in most circumstances. It seems rather bizarre that this government is very happy not having much happen in this place, because they could easily just turn over the documents. Or, as I say, maybe they should show some efforts to recover the $400 million. As I said before, there is nothing in this motion that directs the RCMP. I find it fascinating, members of the government, including the Parliamentary Secretary, who's probably still smarting from the last time that we had an exchange in this place. I find it fascinating that they're worried about directing the RCMP when they improperly directed their Attorney General on SNC, when they improperly directed the RCMP with respect to releasing documents during an open and active investigation in the absolutely tragic Nova Scotia shooting which was still very much raw for the country, but more importantly for the victims of those crimes, all to politically benefit the government's new firearms regulations and agenda. They improperly pressured the commissioner of the RCMP to release details against protocols because it would help the government's agenda. I think if this government was really worried about directing the RCMP, they would read the motion, for one, and recognize that the words direct or encourage or anything close to that are not there. As I said before, if these documents are produced, the RCMP will be able to get them a multiple of avenues. The fact that they might be inadmissible in court has nothing to do with the motion. They think that they're protecting the charter rights. They think they're protecting the charter rights of people who may have committed crimes. Yeah. I love the comments from my honorable colleagues. Law and Order is a fantastic show. Even the new one that's filmed in Toronto, Mr. Speaker, maybe they should actually watch some of it to figure out how these investigations happen. But if the RCMP, if the RCMP has access to documents that might be inadmissible, they can at least put together a timeline of events. They can put together what has occurred. The fact that they're not interested in learning about the wrongdoings of board members they appointed tells you all you need to know, that when this government started appointing board members to this organization, their lobbyists and their friends, their eyes turned green as the color of my tie. And you know what? That SDTC organization has been going on for years without any problems. If you go back into the previous government, Jim Balsillie was the chair of that board, never put in an expense report. There was never an auditor general concern about that organization or the way it dispersed funds. Only when this government decided to appoint its friends that it knew would be in a conflict of interest. In fact, the whistleblower, thank God for the whistleblower, let everybody know before these appointments were made that certain individuals would find it very hard to do their duty because they would be in so many conflicts of interest. What was the answer or response back to that initial concern? Don't worry about it. We've got it taken care of. Well, got it taken care of is right. $400 million all the way to the bank, Mr. Speaker. If Canadians are upset that Parliament is not working, they only need to look at one party. This motion, this request, is within the full rights of Parliament to make and to get. It makes it right, Mr. Chair, because Parliament has asked for it. Just in the past, multiple times when Parliament has asked for documents in previous administrations, do you know what other governments have done? They've found another way to get past the impasse. During a very difficult and controversial issue with respect to treatment of detainees in a previous government, the secret committee was struck in order to allow members of Parliament to see documents, sensitive documents related to national security. I do not see any creativity on that side of the House trying to find a path forward. If this government was interested in getting back to work, they would try to find a path. As I mentioned before, I would be willing to work with that side of the House, Mr. Speaker, to find a path to get this place back to work. It could include giving the documents, but of course we see that they're not that interested in it. But maybe if they recovered the $400 million, we could move along and let this go to a committee where it should be with the full scrutiny, but only if taxpayers are repaid. To me, that would sound like a very reasonable compromise. I would commit to working with my colleagues in order to make that happen. But at the very least, if they're unwilling or unable to even get a significant portion of those $400 million in funds returned, I think we might as well stay here for a very long time. I noted the question from my friend in the block to the previous speaker about how long might this go on. I think we should try to find a compromise, but it has to include either the release of the documents or a full accounting and repatriation of $400 million that should go back to the taxpayer. And the $400 million isn't a number that opposition party members have said was misappropriated or went to ineligible recipients. That's a number from the Auditor General. You can have no more credible source when looking at government spending than the Auditor General. By the way, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be the first time that this government does not accept the findings of the Auditor General. In a very rare case, the Auditor General produced a report on the CERB and wage subsidy audits that this government didn't even accept. It's like one of the first times in at least a decade where findings of the Auditor General were not accepted. But here, I don't hear that they're not accepting these findings. So it seems bizarre to me that they're not also trying to recover the $400 million for taxpayers. So I think, Mr. Chair, we've established Parliament has a right to these documents. Taxpayers have a right to be repaid. There needs to be transparency. And the RCMP, to the extent they wish to look at the documents, should be able to look at them. And the fact that the clerk might make them available to the RCMP or send them along, I don't think should concern anybody here, because once the documents are tabled, they're basically public anyway. So unless the government wants to come up with another way, I think we're going to be here for a little while. And you know what? I am fully confident that when we talk about the severity and the size of the grift in this circumstance, $400 million, it should bring this place to a halt. It should make a government think twice about how it's going to proceed. And the fact that multiple opposition parties support this motion should let everybody know that $400 million, this entire circumstance, is that important that this place is coming to a halt until we get the documents. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to answer any questions from my colleagues. Release the papers.